Okay, Algebra 2C, this is page number 2 for the review 7.5 to 8.1. We're working on numbers 9 through 18. So let's start with number 9. We are adding two complex numbers. Remember, we got to add the real part and the imaginary part. Okay, so if I add the two real parts together, 4 plus 8 gives me the 12. And then if I add the two real parts, 2i plus 1i gives me 3i. And that's my final answer right there. Okay, number 10. Now it's the same idea, but it's subtraction. So the first thing we got to do is we need to distribute this -1. Turn it into addition. It's much easier. Okay, so now I have 6 minus 4i. The first one stays the same. If I get rid of that -1, it's now addition. And in parentheses, next one is -6 plus 5i. Okay, so it's the same idea as the first one, but now we've made it into addition. Add my real parts. Add my imaginary parts. And 6 minus 6 gives me 0. -4i plus 5i gives me positive I. And I don't need this 0, so my final answer is just I. Okay, two quick problems. Down to number 11. Same idea. Let's distribute that negative. If I distribute my -1, I'm going to keep the first one the same. -7 plus 8i. It's addition now, and it's going to make a positive 2 plus 3i. Combine the reals. -7 plus 2 gives me -5. And 8i plus 3i gives me 11i. Okay. Number 12, it looks difficult, but it's the same thing. We just need to distribute. So I'm going to distribute the 3, which gives me -12 plus 3i. I'm going to distribute my 2. So it's going to give me, I'm adding still, so I'm going to keep in parentheses. And I'm getting a -6 plus 4i. And then for the last one, we do not need to distribute anything. Okay, so now we're just combining three complex numbers. Same idea though. Combine all like terms. All the real parts. -12 minus 6 gives me -18. Plus 5 gives me -13. And now I'm going to combine my imaginary parts. 3i plus 4i plus 2i. That should give me 9i. And that's my final answer. Okay, so it's the same thing. Just use your distributive property. Put it in this form right here where they're all complex numbers. Combine the real and the imaginary, and you got it. Okay, down to number 13. Okay, we worked on this today in class. Distribute the 6i, so we get 36i. And 6i times 4i gives me positive 24i squared. And then we know we can simplify this I squared with -1. We can replace it with -1. So that's going to give you my final answer, 36i minus 24. Okay, this is a tricky one. Remember that when you square something, you multiply it by itself. Okay, so we can't distribute this square. What this means is we need to multiply it the way you see it by itself. Okay, so now we're just going to use our FOIL or our distributive property. Okay. So that should give us 6 times 6 gives me 36. 6 times 8i gives me 48i. 8i times 6 gives me 48i. Remember, this is all addition. And 8i times 8i gives me 64i squared. Okay, next I need to combine like terms. Remember that I squared we can simplify with -1. And now I'm just going to combine like terms. 48i plus 48i gives me my 96i. And then 36 minus 64, because the I squared turns into -1, it's going to give me a -28. So I have -28 plus 96i. Okay? And number 16 you'll see is very similar to that. Okay, 15, distributive property. Use your FOIL. 7 times -2 gives me -14. 7 times -8 gives me -56i. 6i times -2 gives me -12i. And 6i times -8i gives me -48i squared. Okay? I'm going to always replace my I squared with -1. Don't forget that. Okay? So now I can combine my like terms. -56i minus 12i gives me -68i. And then -14 plus 48, because I've replaced the I squared with -1, gives me positive 34. Okay, 16 is just like 14. Rewrite it. Make it look like it's multiplying itself so you can clearly see what I'm distributing. Okay? Distribute. Negative 2 times negative 2 gives me positive 4. Negative 2 times 5i gives me negative 10i. 5i times negative 2 gives me negative 10i. And 5i times 5i gives me 25i squared. Combine like terms. Remember to replace your I squared with negative 1. So I can do negative 10i minus 10i gives me negative 20i. And I can do 4 minus 25 because I've replaced that I squared with negative 1, which gives me negative 21. So this one's negative 21 minus 20i. So we got 2 more problems we're working with division here. Remember how simple division is. We need to get this I out of the denominator. And the way we do that is we just multiply by a fancy form of 1. Multiply by I over I. And what you'll notice is 5 times I gives you 5i. And the denominator, I times I gives you I squared. Remember, we can replace this with negative 1. So we're going to get 5i over negative 1, which we can just write as our final answer, negative 5i. Okay, 18. It looks a little more confusing, but use the same skill set. Just multiply by I over I. Okay, and what you'll see is that you should get a negative 3 in the numerator, and in the denominator you should get 7i squared. Now we're just going to simplify this I squared with negative 1. So now we have negative 3i in the numerator over negative 7 in the denominator. And remember, a negative divided by a negative is just like a negative times a negative, which simplifies to positive. So our final answer, 3i over 7. Okay, so notice in both of those there's no I, or no imaginary number in the denominator. That's problems number 9 through 18.